So will this thaw sort of lead to some kind of substantive reduction of heat and the antagonism and the rhetoric that we're seeing between Delhi and Washington? Of course, there was the phone call between Prime Minister Modi and President Trump earlier this week. President Trump called Prime Minister Modi to wish him on his birthday. Milind Vaishnav is Director and Senior Fellow with the South Asia Program at Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. Thank you very much, Mr. Vaishnav, for speaking with us. I start off by asking you, we've seen a lot of rhetoric, a lot of animosity over the last couple of months or so. So what is your assessment of where things stand between India and the United States, given the fact that just earlier this week, a couple of days ago, President Trump telephoned the Prime Minister and wished him on his birthday, both of them taking to social media, acknowledging the call. And over the last sort of 10 days or so, there seems to be a bit of a thaw, at least that's the view here in Delhi. What's the view in Washington? I mean, after all the rhetoric and animosity, are we now moving towards a period of warming of ties?
I think so. That's certainly my sense of it. I think that, both sides have decided to try and kind of demonstrate a workman-like attitude to try and resolve these lingering disputes that they have on trade, on Russian oil, a variety of conciliatory language coming out of the White House, especially President Trump. As you mentioned, the two leaders spoke by phone just a few days ago. Prime Minister Modi has been extremely quick to take advantage of those kind words and reciprocate on social media. And, I have to give credit, frankly, to the Indian government, because I think this is an extremely volatile time. We know we have a very mercurial, unpredictable president. And I think Prime Minister Modi and his colleagues have been remarkably disciplined in staying on message and not escalating this further. And so I take these recent developments as a very welcome and positive step.
So I want to separate the tariff question into two parts. Obviously, the tariffs are split into two. One is the reciprocal tariffs, which were announced, I think, end of July, and it came into effect early August. And then there was the second set of tariffs, which is the oil tariffs, which were imposed sometime in late August, announced early August and imposed late August. On the first set, I think the negotiations are still going on. Earlier this week, we had the Deputy Trade Representative here in Delhi. And then the second one, the oil tariffs, which were imposed by President Trump alone. What do you see as the way out in both of those tariffs, the first set and the second set? Because the view here in Delhi seems to be, while the first set, the negotiations are going on, and it's currently at 25, it could come down to 20, but the second set of 25, only President Trump alone can walk back on that, if at all.
Well, it's entirely on President Trump, you're right. But I think if you look at the data coming out from energy markets, we are seeing some interesting trends develop. We are seeing, and we have seen, frankly, over the past 6 to 9 months, pretty significant increase in Indian imports of U.S. crude. And that's not something that gets talked about a lot, but I think is an empirical fact. There is also some indication that some of the advanced purchase orders for Russian crude have declined. Now, I think from the Indian standpoint, I don't believe that there's a kind of deep-seated ideological commitment to importing Russian crude. In fact, the data suggests that prior to the Russian invasion of Ukraine, India was importing very little Russian crude indeed. And I think India would be happy, is my guess, to take imports from elsewhere, including the United States, provided the U.S. can help broker those kind of supply arrangements. I mean, one reason we all know that India is taking Russian oil is because there was a widespread belief that if that oil to go off the market, it would lead to an inflationary spiral, right? Yeah. So I actually think that India is quite willing and is quietly doing the very things that the U.S. administration wants. On the reciprocal tariff issue, I do think that we will get a deal. I'm unable to predict what the contours of that deal might be. We know that agriculture and dairy have been sticking points. We know how politically sensitive those are, especially to this prime minister. We have the Bihar elections coming up, which is a largely agrarian rural state. My sense is that the Indians will come up with some concessions that will be palatable to them, that the U.S. administration will pocket. And so fundamentally, I think I'm optimistic on both of these issues. They can be sorted out if cooler heads prevail. But I think, frankly, a lot of this rests with the U.S. administration and how they'd like to proceed.
So the starting point of what we reckon this rather cold phase between India and the United States was right after Operation Sindoor and Trump tweeting about it, claiming credit for the ceasefire. And clearly, India was not on the same page as President Trump. India refused to give him credit or even acknowledge the fact that there was a degree of mediation on the part of the Trump administration. There's also continued U.S. engagement with the Pakistani leadership. General Munir was hosted at the White House for lunch back in June, and I believe later this month on the sidelines of Unga in New York, President Trump will be meeting with Pakistani Prime Minister Shahbaz Sharif. So the degree of trust, particularly on the Pakistan question, do you think that trust is gone? What will it take to rebuild that trust?
Well, I am optimistic actually about the short to medium run. I'm a little bit more pessimistic about the long run because the memories of this spat and the way in which India has been treated, they believe unfairly, capriciously, without due process. Those memories are going to have a long shelf life. And we have to remember that there have been elements of the government, elements of the strategic elite, who for the past quarter century or more have been advising against a full-throated embrace of the United States, precisely because they feared a moment like this would come when the U.S. would essentially kind of throw India under the bus, as it were. And so we've gotten out, hopefully, of that low point. But even if we get back to something that resembles normalcy, I think there's going to be a very long shadow
Okay.
of the last 6 months. On the Pakistan question, I think this only further muddies the picture. I think you're exactly right. It does appear as if there is a kind of reset going on with this administration. You mentioned the upcoming meeting between President Trump and Shahbaz Sharif. There have been rumors that he'd also be meeting the Pakistani Army Chief of Staff, General Munir. We'll wait and see if that actually happens. But, this is an administration which I think does not have the same institutional memory. It doesn't have a shared consensus on the nature of the China challenge.
Mm-hmm.
We know that there are personal dealings involving President Trump and his family and Pakistani businessmen. And so this is a very complex set of factors at play. But I think it's something that the Indians are watching very closely and I think could further lead to this trust deficit.
I also want to ask you about, the pictures that we had earlier this month from Tianjin on the sidelines of the SCO summit, where there was this sort of brief exchange between Prime Minister Modi, President Putin of Russia, and President Xi Jinping of China. It got a lot of play in the American media. The strategic community in Washington was sort of, aghast at those pictures. They pushed back against the administration. I think even President Trump at one point tweeted about it, saying, maybe we've lost India to deep, dark China, so on and so forth. How much do you think that had a role to play in this recent thaw that we're seeing between India and the United States? And also, just realistically, this coming together of India, China, Russia, what are the limits to that alignment, if at all there were to be one?
Okay, yeah, a couple of questions there. Let me try to unpack each of them. I think that certainly the images of Xi Jinping, Vladimir Putin, Narendra Modi gathering together in a very kind of chummy way, shall we say, on the sidelines of the SCO summit in China did send a very clear signal. I think that signal was probably sent purposefully on the Indian side. And I think that it certainly did raise some concerns in this administration about whether they would be, quote unquote, losing India. But above and beyond that, and this is speculation, but I think it's a factor we should consider. We saw last week the confirmation hearing of Ambassador designate Sergio Gore to be the next U.S. ambassador to New Delhi. We know that he is a close confidant of the president. He currently runs the Office of White House Presidential Personnel, which is a key post that staffs the entire executive branch. My suspicion is that he is not going to want to go in Delhi and show up there amidst a series of escalating crises. It's in his interest to actually deliver some wins here that might stabilize the relationship. So it's mere speculation, but I wouldn't be surprised if that's also been a factor in kind of bringing the temperature down in Washington. On the final question you had about alignment, I do think there are limits, frankly, and I think India recognizes that. The Russia relationship essentially has two dimensions. There is a decades-long defense relationship. That defense relationship is going nowhere. Yes, it's true that Indian imports of Russian military equipment have been declining year on year, but there is a legacy relationship there that is very important, will continue to be important for quite a long time. And the second dimension, of course, is the energy relationship we spoke of, which is the newer relationship, but not insignificant, but something where I could see India pivoting away from over time. And there are the similar constraints with respect to China. I mean, I think the signs we're seeing from New Delhi is that there is some desire to maybe see some kind of economic rapprochement that would allow Chinese trade and investment flows to be unlocked. But the strategic concerns that New Delhi has vis-a-vis Beijing are very much there. The memories of Galwan in 2020 are very much fresh in the minds of this government. And so I think both respect to Russia, which is really a kind of two-dimensional relationship, and China, I do think there are limits. But
Okay.
again, I think India has been very clever in signaling that they have options.
All right.
And I think it's been a contributing factor to the turnabout we're seeing in Washington.
All right. Milind Vaishnav, Director and Senior Fellow with South Asia Carnegie, thank you very much for joining us with your thoughts and perspective. Thank you.